Good afternoon. When I was first told I had to, I got offered a chance to do a talk here, I thought, what should I do that was really provocative, that would get people to come and hear it? And I thought the end of real estate development as we know it, question mark. And in the last 9 months, I guess, when I've been going around the world and carrying on my work, I took the question mark off because I'm now so convinced of its veracity. Over the last 20 years, I've been working on various projects around the world, first in branding and communications and marketing, projects like the Shard, various commercial projects in the City of London, most of the tall buildings at various stages, Battersea Power Station, where a lot of the learning for the stuff that I'm going to talk to you about started, One World Trade Center in New York, Hudson Yards, Central Park Tower in New York, lots of tall buildings. And I just had to put a couple of tall building slides in here because I'm not mainly talking about tall buildings. But over the years, the work has changed. I realized that the world has changed. And it's come to looking at real estate strategies for placemaking. How do we make successful projects? And in that context, we've been working over the last year in 5 or so of the biggest real estate projects in North America, helping developers to understand the future of real estate. And this is the 78, 56 acres for Related Midwest, master plan by SOM in Chicago. This is the 10 million square foot East Harbor project in Toronto, and many others. Now, why have we started doing this? Why have we changed the shape of our business? And why do I think the end of real estate development as we know it is coming? Well, as we all know, the world is in transition to a huge extent, not only politically, but in the ways that it affects us. And as we've heard in the earlier talk, I'm going to use this. I'd prefer to point. Firstly, from suburban to urban, we know that the populations are moving into the cities at an ever-increasing rate, and for the first time in history, growth in cities is outgrowing that outside of cities. We know as well that people are moving from the idea of stuff to experience, right? They say we've reached peak stuff. Millennials particularly are not buying stuff in the way that they used to, partly because they haven't got anywhere to keep it, but also because they want to spend their money in more meaningful ways. And so the rise of Instagram shows us that people want to say, I did this, I went here, I met these people, not I bought this thing. So we're moving away from the age of consumption that we previously lived in. And also the way that we buy, particularly millennials and the things that we're interested in, have moved towards purpose-driven purchasing. And so 80% of millennials rank making the world a better place as a priority in their lives, and they're spending money on brands that represent those things. And interestingly, it's not just now about millennials that are doing that, it's also big business. So last year, Lawrence Fink, the head of BlackRock, wrote a letter to all of his investors saying BlackRock was only now going to invest in businesses that demonstrated some form of social good. So we are much more interested in businesses that are presenting a change, a positive change in the world, and people are putting their money in those places. And the truth is that we all like to buy things from people that we trust, from brands that we trust, from ideas that we trust. And so we are much more interested in how people behave and what they do. And in the age of the internet, you can no longer get away with not being trusted. People find out immediately whether what you say is true and whether you are a brand that they can trust. And the same is very true within developments. Even though development has a very, very long feedback loop, that you can create something, and by the time people are actually using it, the people who originally made it are long gone. Now you get immediate feedback on whether something is working, whether people like it, whether they will keep purchasing it. And also, the way that we buy things is moving from the idea of product. We used to be businesses that made products that people bought to services. And you only have to look at the biggest industries in the world now. All of them provide services, not products. In fact, Amazon, the biggest marketplace, Amazon and Alibaba, the biggest marketplaces in the world, don't have any products that they make, or they only sell it. WeWork, which is now the biggest occupier, second only to the US government in the City of London, the second biggest occupier, second only to JP Morgan in New York City, don't actually make any office space. Airbnb is one of the biggest hospitality providers in the world, doesn't have any real estate. Uber, the biggest logistics company, doesn't have any cars, and so on and so on and so on. And we see the fact that what we're more interested in is the service that these businesses provide, not the products. And the consumer is changing as well, from this idea of the collective, the whole of society, to the importance of the individual. And I will use this of my family as an example. This is not my family, but I'll use it to illustrate it. On the left-hand side, in the 1920s and 1930s, people expected that they would have jobs for life. You know, they went into great companies and they were thankful that they were being allowed to be employed there. We thought about them as bodies employed in creating products. And I'll say my grandfather was a tailor. And my grandfather started as a tailor at the age of 14, and he retired as a tailor at the age of 97. He worked for 84 years as a tailor. And if you'd ever said to him, "Grandad, are you happy?" he would have said, "Happy? What do you mean, am I happy in my job? I'm just a tailor. I just come to work." And so much so that the day that his wife died, he went into work the next morning because he was so committed to that. His son went to a grammar school and then became a lawyer, became a judge, and then became the master of an Oxford college. So he had moved on from being a tailor, and he told me that he remembered the point he said to his dad, "Dad, I don't want to be a tailor." And his dad said, "Great, I've worked hard so that you can go off and do something better with your life. Off you go." Then my father, so this was my mother's father, my father, who incidentally is giving a talk simultaneously next door, he said he was going to be an architect. So he said to his dad, "Screw you, Dad, I'm off." He went to California, dyed his hair blonde, became an architect, and went a bit wild. But he's still dedicated to his work in the same way. There he is in his 70s, giving a talk next door, traveling all the way around the world. That's not me on the left-hand side, but I do not live my life in the same way. And in fact, I might very well say, "You know what, Dad? I'm giving up on the rat race. I think I'm going to go and do something with my hands. I think I'm going to become a tailor." And everyone would think, "Brilliant, he's in touch with his creative self." Whereas my grandfather would be spinning in my grave, thinking I worked all my life to make sure you didn't have to do that. But we're changing the way our expectations are changing regarding the things that we want. And that means that real estate is in a huge amount of transition too, and we have to think about it in fundamentally different ways. The main thing is we have to stop thinking about real estate in terms of just bricks and mortar. And we have to start thinking about it and seeing where the value is in place, right? We all know that the way that we sell propositions nowadays, the way we sell office space, the way we sell big developments is in the places around it. And you only have to look at successful residential marketing to show you that people talk about neighborhoods far more than they do about properties. We recognize the value that comes about in successful places that people want to go to. We are essentially, as an industry, moving away from buildings towards experiences. We recognize that retail is one of the, bricks and mortar retail is under a huge amount of pressure all the way around the world. Retailers who only sell things are failing. And you only have to look at Macy's, Sears and Roebuck, and the large department stores in the US that are failing is because they are not offering experiences. And we as an industry have to do the same thing and recognize that it's not buildings anymore, it's experiences that we need to be doing. Traditional development is not set up to deliver experiences. Traditional development exists in a silo, and I'm afraid you can't see that very well, and we all know the process. Developer has a site. They work out what they can stick on the site, then they get somebody to design something that goes on the site, then somebody starts building it, and sooner or later they go to a marketing person, like I used to do, and they'd say, "Can you tell us a story and help us sell it?" And I used to think, well, why didn't you think what the story was before you designed it and before you started making it? Because then maybe you wouldn't have to make it squirrely or put a swimming pool on the top of it or do some gimmick to help you sell it. And then you get to the end where people think, "Oh, nobody's coming here and I'm not quite sure why. Let's see if we can put parties on it or we can do silly things in the space and we can try and encourage people to come here." Whereas if we'd actually thought about why someone was going to come here in the first instance, we wouldn't have to think like this. And if you go through that siloed process, this is what you end up with. This is Mission Bay in San Francisco, which I've been doing quite a lot of work in San Francisco recently. In fact, I was there last week. Mission Bay is a multi-billion-dollar project with a number of world-class architects, world-class master plans, world-class developers. Nobody wanted it to end up as a sort of desolate zone where people think of it as a terrible part of the city. But the problem is the siloed thinking means that you end up with public spaces that are empty and places where I took this photo, this poor chap has either been fired or dumped. And this is where he goes. Whereas half a mile down the road is this. This is the Wharf, which is a sort of a hugely popular drinking establishment in San Francisco that sits on the water, looks at an oily, stinking dock, that the furniture is cheap, the entire place is cheap but popular. And most developers would find it easier to spend the millions of dollars on this failure than they would the hundreds of thousands of dollars on this, because they don't have the appreciation or the permission to think in this cheap way. And the truth is that places are non-linear achievements. Places are not linear processes. And we have to think about them as such, because successful places are messy. Cities are messy. Things that we like are messy. And so we have to think about development as a completely holistic process where we are doing place design, place management, place branding and communications, because ultimately we're all trying to persuade somebody about something that we believe in, and place offer all at the same time. And we have to start with the idea of what our place will become when we begin designing. And so the process that I've been undertaking, the way that we've moved our business and the consultancy that I do around the world is about helping people understand placemaking. So placemaking is a term we've all heard. It's like sustainability. It's a nice buzzword. Not everybody knows what it means. So what is it? Well, the more I do this, the more I realize that placemaking is very simply development, right? Placemaking is development, and that's what we should be thinking about, that developers now have to be considering themselves as placemakers, because if they're not, then it's just buildings, right? Then we're just making buildings, and buildings are not going to solve the problems of the future, and buildings are not going to make us happier people. And so the way we have to think about this is a difference between software and hardware. Hardware, everybody in this conference is an expert in hardware, right? There are a lot of people doing it, and there are a lot of people doing it brilliantly. And so we are capable of dealing with the hardware. But the software side of it, the emotional side of it, that is much more complex and something we have to really focus on. And the truth is, most of us are here flying around the world to come to these conferences because we love this industry. We love doing this. People are incredibly passionate about real estate. But we never talk about passion. We never bring that part of the conversation. And most people go to places, most people engage with places because they are passionate, because they have an emotional attachment. And we forget, but we have to remember that we are basically just hairless apes. We are animals, right? We are animals. And we crave the social, not the architectural. And the industry is set up to deliver architectural responses to social issues. So the way that we've been thinking about it, and why this is not just kind of me showing you pictures of apes, is that I had to put some percentages in my presentation to match up with the earlier ones. I thought if I didn't have percentages, I wouldn't be doing it properly. There is a breakdown of this, which we call the 70-20-10 rule. 70% of what makes successful places is traditional development stuff, right? The normal stuff everybody does, where we've got having a good bit of new thinking, land identification, design, planning, detailed design, construction management, finance, people, IT, sales and lettings, marketing, all that good stuff, right? That's sort of 70% of what we need to do. Then there's an extra 20% that can make exciting places and that can add a little bit of pizzazz to it. That's the original thinking that you can get by going out and getting really interesting consultants, clever, trendy architects. Maybe you can get some other interesting people involved, some art maybe. Maybe you could get a big sculpture, because that'll make a big difference. But actually, the thing that ties it all together, the thing that really makes the difference is vision. Right, is the vision at the top of it that draws all of those different threads together and means that we're not siloed in our thinking. And there is real numbers behind this, right? This isn't just me saying, I've got an idea that this is what. There are real numbers behind this. If you look at projects that have real vision, that really move the market, that go 2 steps ahead of what is happening, they make more money. And the Shard in London, 27% increase in commercial values compared to those commercial values that were previously listed in that area. In Bilbao, after the art gallery came, 25% increase in commercial values. Basti Power Station, 23% increase in sales values on all other residential projects nearby. Poundbury, who a lot of people don't think is being a particularly advanced model, which is a residential development by the Prince of Wales in Dorchester, 27% increase in residential values from all other equivalent projects nearby. Millennium Park in Chicago, 25% increase in commercial values. There are figures that back up what I'm saying, that if you have clear vision, if you can deliver successful places, you will get higher values than those projects nearby that you are competing with. And it means that we have to think about how we finance real estate. And we have to think about where the money comes from and how we fund it over the long term, because it is a long-term issue. So we have to rethink the development pro forma. So we have a traditional pro forma that says, well, this is what the building costs, and I can get this much retail, and if I have that much rent in the retail, then this is my numbers, and I can pay for that sort of building. But we have to think about how the ground floor can increase the values of the projects above the ground floor, rather than what it contributes to itself. So in a very, very simple model, we have a typical office building where the ground floor may equal 10% of the available area of the building, but it's only 1/3 of the value of the upper floors, right? So in fact, in terms of value, it's very low, even though it's a reasonable amount of floor space. And imagine if we then just give away all of the floor space on the ground floor to do interesting things like shared spaces that people go to, finding nice little shops that people like to go into, cycle studios or cultural anchors, whatever those things that make interesting ground floors that we like to visit, and we just give it away. Well, if we give it away, all you have to do to pay for all of that space is increase the rent you get on the upper floors by 3.6%. So if you said to somebody, I have this fantastic ground floor experience, I have this wonderful environment that you want to visit, do you think I can get 3% more in our office rent? It's an easy question. It's an easy answer to say that you can. It is not rocket science. So if I can tell you, if I can prove to you that you can get up to 30% increase in values on your property, that you can do it by investing relatively small amounts in your floor space, why isn't everybody doing it? You think this is obvious, this isn't rocket science. Well, it's a very simple reason why not everybody is doing it. It's because you need to have vision, but you also need to change the culture of organizations, and fundamentally you need to change the organizations themselves. You cannot expect people just to be able to deliver all this amazing stuff without fundamentally changing what they do and how they do it. And the reason why they find it very hard to do that is because of this. Right? This is the modern development company. And I'm sure all of us, the laugh says we all recognize it, right? And it's not only the gender of the people sitting around the table, the age, it's also these jobs, which are just about delivering hardware. Development, construction, finance, land, planning. Maybe there's a design guy, right? But we are not thinking about the future and the world in which we inhabit. This is a quick example of a developer in the US called Jamestown. Their most prominent project is Chelsea Market in New York. It is a fantastically exciting, hugely creative, experience-led destination. Google have just bought the whole building. If you go there, it is a wonderful example of real creativity applied to development thinking. This is Jamestown's website. Jamestown, we have invested across the risk spectrum with a focus on conservative investments with proven performance. If you go to a Jamestown project, you would never believe that this was the same company. In fact, I showed this to my colleagues. They said, you sure that's the right Jamestown? Right? It is, because it's not about individuals developing creativity. It's about organizational creativity, and it's about implementing change through the organization. So this is the way they talk about themselves. And rather than reading all of the text, within that it says that you cannot do a project at Jamestown without fundamentally engaging with all of those components. Asset management, leasing, merchandising, creative marketing, branding and programming are part of their process. You cannot deliver a Jamestown project without going through those steps concurrently and as a team. And that means that you cannot do a Jamestown project without delivering something which is well thought out, creative, thinks about who's going there and doing things that are different and interesting. And there's a really interesting truth to this, and this is what I think is so critically important. MIT did a study a few years ago about the performance of teams, and they discovered that as people might have thought the high IQ, a collectively high IQ makes a team perform well, and it doesn't. The thing that makes a team perform well is a thing called EQ, or the ability to read the mind in the eyes. So this is this. If you can look at the eyes, and people who are very good at EQ can tell what that person is thinking, and people who are very bad at it find it hard to. And the truth is that women tend to score more highly in the ability to read the mind in the eyes test, which is why teams with more women in outperform those that with fewer women in, right? It's a very simple fact. And what we have to think about and the way that we move real estate forward is the fact that a lot of the roles that have been traditionally filled by women in real estate, like marketing, branding, HR, experience, culture, all of those things which have been left out of the making of successful places, are critical to the creation of successful places. And so in the future, what we have to do is we have to make those roles more senior. And people who don't will not make successful places. And the projects that I'm working on across the US and Canada all have a mix of genders which far outstrips the norm within the development industry, because people are appreciating that you have to engage with all of your customer base, not just the middle-aged white men sitting around the board table. So, the end of real estate as we know it, how do we address it and what do you need to do as a sector? First, we have to accept that there is new thinking in what we do. It is not just about buildings anymore. We have to think about experiences. 2, we have to think about the economics of real estate and recognize that we have to think more cleverly about long-term investment in place and how that delivers value in the long term. And critically, and the most importantly, we have to change our organizations so that they are thinking more holistically about not only the customers that they serve, the people that make them up, and then the places that we deliver. And what is so important is this is not future gazing, right? This is absolutely now. And I'm doing this in projects across the world, and I'm speaking to developers who understand the value of all of these things, and anybody who isn't doing it is going to miss out, and they're going to carry on making terrible places. Thank you very much.